Hey everyone, we're excited to get this episode started, but before we get it started, we've got a disclaimer. I know, it's been a while since we've done one of these. The views and opinions expressed by guest Dr. Andy Howard should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. And with that, we'll get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Studd.
And I'm Ron Studd.
And Ron for episode 43. Tonight on the show, we have Dr. Andy Howard. How you doing tonight, Andy?
I'm doing great. Great to see you guys.
Wonderful to see you, as always. I hope you're ready for the Ember Round. But as always, before we do, Ron and I have to pay tribute to the official spirit of Between Two Studs, Malort. We're going to honor you and our sponsor by having a shot of Malort. Cheers to you, Andy.
Cheers.
Thank you. This isn't Malort, but cheers to you guys.
You know, Andy, you do live in the Chicago area. You live right in the city, in Hyde Park. I assume you've had Malort before, correct?
You know, I have. There's a little bit of a story there. I took, just for fun, I took an improv class at a little improv theater right near where I lived in Hyde Park. And there's a terrific dive bar right next door. Just like, if you like dive bars, this one's a great one. It's the sign on it says Woodlawn Tap, but nobody calls it that. If you're in the mix, you call it Jimmy's. Everybody knows, oh yeah, Jimmy's. Everyone's going to meet at Jimmy's. And Jimmy's, you walk in and the place just feels like Malort. So after the improv class, the whole class would get together at Jimmy's and we'd all have Malort. It was good times.
Andy, you have to take me to Jimmy's.
Oh, you'll love Jimmy's. You'll love Jimmy's.
I want to go there.
I will come on down. And just for reference, Ron, getting from where I live in North Chicago down to Andy is quite a hike. But I will gladly do it if I get to hang out with you at Jimmy's.
No,
all I'm asking for, take me to the improv class, and then I'll go to Jimmy's as well because I like improv.
We could go to the improv. We could see a show at the improv theater and go to Jimmy's. That's a great night.
Sounds great to me. Awesome.
Well, so buckle in. You're in the Ember Round. I hope you're ready.
Right.
I know you've listened to some episodes, so you know how this goes.
Mm-hmm.
So, Andy, we tried to do the family tree thing before the call started, but explain to the audience, how do you know us?
Okay, so my wife and Alex's wife are first cousins. Let's see.
That was so well explained.
Yeah,
I spent like 5 minutes drawing it out. It's like, well, my wife's father's sister's daughter's husband.
Right. It's
But when we got
Debbie,
to that. Yeah, so go on, sorry.
No, my wife Debbie, her mom, and Hannah's dad, were siblings. And so my wife's mom was the oldest of four, and Hannah's dad was the youngest of four. But I was understood of those four siblings, those two were particularly close. They really, really were close friends.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because when my wife and I, when we first were planning to move to Chicago, we were not even engaged at that time. I think that we were visiting Chicago, and you were really some of the first people in Chicago I ever knew. So you were my representation of what Chicago was before I became a Chicagoan myself. So thank you for that.
Oh, no problem.
So that's how it all works. And then you met Ron at my wedding this past year.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I was looking at some videos of that wedding just recently. What struck me about the videos that I took with my iPhone was the dance floor was full of people of all ages. I love that there were, people in their 80s out there and, 2-year-old toddlers. Everyone was shaking their booty out on the dance floor at that wedding. It was a wonderful wedding.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I think, the DJ did a really good job. One of the things, in fact, I need to get our DJ on the show. But one of the things I noticed that he was doing towards the second half of the playing was he incorporated the lyrics of like 70s and 60s music. So that appealed to the older crowd that could sing along. But he had a beat, like he did a mix, and the beat was more modern songs from the last 10 years. And that made the young people happy because they could dance to it. So together it had this really good hybrid where everyone was happy to be on the dance floor.
Oh yeah, that's good. I hadn't noticed that, but you're right. That's that's advanced DJ move right there.
Advanced. We're going to have him on. DJ Cruz is his name.
So, Dr. Howard, would you mind tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your areas of interest?
Sure. So I'm a husband. I'm a father. I've got a 9-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. And,
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm a physician, a radiation oncologist. That we can talk a little bit later about what exactly that is. I work for the University of Chicago, and I've worked there for about coming on 12 years now. So it's a great gig.
Wow. Well, we'll dive into that for sure. Equally important, Andy, what are you currently imbibing in right now?
Oh, yeah. So I am drinking a Great Lakes Dortmunder Gold Lager.
Ooh.
So, it's in Ohio. You guys are familiar with Great Lakes Brewing.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, Ohio brewery. Actually, I have a good friend at work. So I started working at this place in 2010. So he went to Ohio State. I went to University of Wisconsin. So since 2010, we have had a standing bet. At any time Ohio State and the Wisconsin Badgers face each other in football, which they don't do every year, but almost every year, we have a standing bet. And the loser has to bring the other one beer from their home state. And to this date, he has yet to bring me any Ohio beer because the Badgers always lose. It's really discouraging.
One of these years.
One of these years.
Alex has a similar bet with one of his friends with the Bills and the Dolphins. You want to tell us about that, Alex?
Yeah, the quick story with that one is he's been on the show. Taylor Lacey, he's been on the podcast, and he is a Dolphins fan. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. And so they play each other. They're in the same NFL division. So they play each other twice a year. And if the Bills sweep the Dolphins, I win, and vice versa. And we have all these tiebreakers, right? If they if it's 1-1, then it's like whoever has the highest record. And if that's a tie, we have like 7 different tiebreakers. Fortunately, we've never had to utilize them all. But all you really need to know is I'm winning the bet like 5-2 or something like that.
Nice.
And the loser has to take the winner out for a nice steak dinner. So we'll go to like a Ruth's Chris, something like that, and the loser has to pick up the tab. So,
that's a good bet. That's good.
Yeah, it's a year-long bet. So it's a lot of fun. And honestly, he lives in Boston now. I live in Chicago, and it almost kind of forces us to get together. It's sort of like, right, well, so it's more about getting together than the actual steak dinner. But of course, bragging rights are also very important.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Ron, what are you currently drinking?
So I'm having some Knobs Creek again. I love Knobs Creek. It's a good solid, So I've got that, and it's always good. What about you, Alex?
So I'm trying something new tonight in honor of I'm officially, as of recording this, I'm done with my MBA program. And
hey, congratulations, Alex! I didn't know that.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. So one of my students in my cohort, I guess you would call it, I was chatting with him. He was in my group for our capstone. And he was telling me that he is working on a team and starting a distillery. And I was like, cool. I'd like to sample some. And then he got me some. So it's called Heaven's Door Straight Rye Whiskey.
Ooh.
I don't know all the details other than he gave me this free little bottle, and it tastes pretty good. I mean, it's to me, it's what you'd expect in a rye, especially it's a 46% rye. So it's definitely a little stronger in the flavor, but I really like ryes. So if you like ryes, keep your keep your eyes out for Heaven's Door. So
Awesome.
Nice.
All right, Andy.
all
so
right.
our next question.
Yeah.
So we love asking our guests this because we always get really cool responses on this. And one thing just to clarify, so basically for this question, pick any piece of art. And art can be anything. So it could be a movie, it could be a piece of music, it could be even a poem that you read somewhere. And if it resonates with you, tell us about that. And tell us about why it resonates with you.
Okay. So I knew this was going to be one of the questions. And I have to say, got myself kind of excited about this because I had all these thoughts about it. So I'm going to throw a few at you.
Okay.
So one thing that I've really been enjoying is my dad turned me on to this Wisconsin author. Her name is Quan Berry, Quan is her first name, Barry. And she wrote this novel called We Ride Upon Sticks. So it's set in 1989 in Danford, Massachusetts. I think I'm getting the name right. And it's about a group. It's the high school girls varsity field hockey team from this little high school, and they end up using witchcraft to win field hockey games, which is like a sort of a strange setup, and not the sort of book I would normally find myself attracted to. But something about the writing and the character portrayal, I absolutely love this book.
So what's the genre? Is it a horror? Is it a comedy? Like, what is that?
Yeah, no, it's good question. And she kind of plays with the magical, it's like magical realism. So is it actually magic, or is something just a little weird happening? It's never like Harry Potter, hocus pocus.
Okay, I was wondering if there was
more subtle. Yeah.
Okay.
See, I was kind of
wands.
thinking. I was going in the 1980s, like Styx the band, right? Or maybe Ride Upon the River Styx, right? Like I'm thinking a few different directions there, but still, I'm sold. This sounds really cool.
No, it's
well.
really,
And when you got into the 80s, I was thinking of what was the Michael J. Fox movie with the when he became a Wolfman? Is what we call Wolfman?
Oh yeah, Teen Wolf.
Oh, Teen Wolf. Teen Wolf. Yeah.
Teen Wolf. That's the angle.
Right?
Once you started getting into 80s high school sports, that's the angle my head was taking. So
well, this book. I mean, this book. This is how old I am. I was a high school senior in 1989. Like these characters are exactly my age. So that's part of the fun, is that there's all these references to 80s. The world of the 80s. I feel like, I immediately know what that feels like. I immediately identify with that.
Was this set in the 80s and written in the 80s, or is it like written more recently?
No, it's written now. I think it's only a few years old, but it's set in the 80s. Yeah,
but it plays to that 80s homage, and which is actually I don't know if I was just talking to my wife Hannah about this last night, actually, about Stranger Things. I don't know if you watched that show, but that has blown open this fascination and curiosity with 80s culture amongst young people. And so it's amazing, this like nostalgia. Even people who are in Gen Z who weren't even alive in the 80s have actually gotten this real interest and fascination. One of the seasons of Stranger Things, almost the whole season is set in a mall. And it was like a brand new mall, and everyone's excited. And it's just, everyone's got crazy hairdos, right?
Right. Oh, that sounds great. I have not seen Stranger Things. Now you're making me feel like I've got to. So we might need to cut this recording off a little early so I can get to that.
I mean,
so I didn't mean to interrupt you. But these characters were in exactly where you were in 1989.
Oh yeah. So that's really, so if you're looking for a good novel, Quan Berry, We Ride Upon Sticks. That's a really fun one. All right, another. I've also been so my kids. I read a lot of books with my kids. I have read a lot of books with my kids as they were growing up. And one of the many great joys of being a father has been discovering the whole world of children's literature, and it is just fantastic. I mean, so many books are written. You can tell they're written at multiple levels. They're written of course, to entertain the child. But there's a certain amount of like, winking at the parents who are clearly probably the ones actually doing the reading, um, in a way that's really enjoyable. So there's a couple. There's one called "Those Darn Squirrels" by a guy named Adam Rubin.
I've
Very
read that
entertaining.
book.
Have you?
That's a
Do you have
that's
kids, Ron? I didn't know.
I do. I have a 9-year-old who turns 10 next
Oh,
actually
hey.
later this month. But there's a really crotchety old guy in the comic for his like those darn squirrels, and I love it.
Yes.
It's a fun book.
Totally, totally. We in our household we make reference to old man
Wait,
Finkwater or whatever his name is. Yeah,
Yeah, that's his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Something like
have
that.
to read this book because Ron, I don't know if you know this. Our father, who's probably listening to this episode, has become quite enamored by these squirrels in his backyard. He feeds them every day. He's named them. He loves these squirrels, and this has been a thing he's done since retirement. But this is. It sounds like this is an old man who hates the squirrels.
Oh yeah.
In the book,
Well, sort of hates the squirrel.
Hates, loves.
Love, hates.
They're kind of frenemies.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read this book, but I'm going to be thinking about my dad as I read it. He's the. Is it a protagonist? Is it an antagonist? Who's this guy?
He's a central character. That's a good question. What do you think, Ron?
It's tough because
Yeah.
I feel like you aren't right. Like they don't outright say the squirrels are the protagonist because you use him as he's kind of the bridge character that kind of brings you into the story because
I see.
you as a human, you are a
Right.
human, you're going to relate to him, but he's kind of got all these frustrations with the squirrels. But as it kind of goes on, you kind of see like maybe they both don't need to hate each other quite as much as they do.
Right.
So
Well,
he's kind of like a
don't
weird
ruin
gateway
any-
character.
Don't take any spoilers, Ron.
And
Okay.
there's a couple sequels. Have you read the sequels, Ron?
No, not yet.
Oh, there's those darn squirrels and the cat next door. Those darn squirrels fly south. The fly south one is particularly good. Yeah, they're really
Okay.
fun. Yeah.
I'll have to
Do
check them out.
squirrels fly south?
But yeah, I mean there's also a
don't-
relationship with the birds that live in the yard and yeah, things get complicated.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to read them.
Yeah. Yeah. I highly
Yeah.
recommend that. And then last one I was gonna there's a book that I'm reading now with my 9-year-old. So my kids are going to summer camp, sleepaway summer camp for the first time this summer. And
Oh, cool.
so we've been talking about that and reading books about that. And so my 9-year-old and I are kind of joint reading a book called Float, Float, by Laura Martin. And so the book is about a bunch of 12-year-old boys, really, mostly about boys, who are going to a summer camp. It's a special summer camp for kids with disabilities, but all the kids have sort of magical disabilities. So the main character, gravity doesn't affect him, so he tends to float up. So unless he's wearing like a weighted vest or something, he would float up, through the atmosphere and asphyxiate up in outer space. And another kid keeps catching on fire, and not in a way that hurts him, but
Oh my! So
he's
when you
next
say
to something.
disabilities, I mean these are
They're real,
like,
disabilities.
I mean they could die from these magical curses in a way.
Right?
They're curses,
Yeah.
but they're also, I'm sure, part of the story is how they can use their abilities, their disabilities as an ability. Is that sort of the idea?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it ends up being a really touching story about making friends and about the whole notion of setting goals and and about how we judge each other and ourselves and how we can learn to overcome those prejudgments. It's a really touching one. Okay, Ron, now I'm curious. Like, do you have any other like kids books that you've read with your kids that you're particularly fond of that you think about?
Ooh. One I really like is Chicken Trek. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
Oh,
that
I don't
one.
know that one.
Oh, so I remember I read it when I was about my daughter's age. I want to say it was in 3rd or 4th grade. And it's about a kid who goes, it's like there's a contest to kind of go to every it's a fast food joint, but it's basically every one of these in every single city. So there's like maybe 50 of them in every state. You have to go to every one of them. So this kid ends up, he breaks something. He finds out the only way he can make money to repay for this is for him to like agree to go to all these places and eat at every single one of these stops. And there's a weird like witch lady that has some evil magical powers, and she's like cursing the kid, and
A lot of magic. And
yeah. But it was
seeing
something
the
where
common trend.
I was really impressed that my daughter really enjoyed it too. So, and she
great.
really loves. She's really gotten hooked on all the Ramona books. So she loves Beverly Cleary, and she was kind of disappointed once Beverly Cleary passed that she's like, well, there's no more Beverly Cleary books. I've read them all. And I was like, well, that's cool. But now it's time to move on to Judy Blume or somebody else. But it's often I'll go into her room and she's listening to Beverly Cleary books, which is kind of cool.
That is really cool. It is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done children's literature is really impressive. It's neat. It's neat how that's a world I feel like I've gotten to rediscover through being a dad.
It's kind of cool because I feel like as an adult, there is probably some stigma to like if you were just pick it up by yourself. But with kids, it's just like, oh no, I'm like reading it to my daughter, and everyone's like, oh, that's fair. That's
Listen,
cool.
I don't care what anybody says. I read The Hungry Caterpillar on the Red Line every single day to my office.
That's a solid book.
That is a solid book. That's a very solid book.
So Andy, just to keep pace.
Yeah.
I have to ask. One of the questions we always ask our guests at the end of the end round is name a way that COVID, this horrible thing, this global pandemic, has had a positive impact on your life. Ron and I started this podcast. Is there something maybe introspective, a new hobby, a new interest? What has COVID brought you that you'll take with it even after we're out of this?
It's funny. My wife and I were talking about this. I feel like life before COVID was a little frenetic. Like we were overscheduled. We were doing a lot. One of the things I've realized about myself recently is that I really am an introvert. I'm kind of an extroverted introvert, but I need that downtime to recharge. And we were doing a little too much before COVID. And once I remember, especially, those early months in March and April of 2020, I'd go for a long walk and I just get lots of quiet time by myself. And it just felt so good to get that. So I've learned from COVID to kind of limit my activities in a positive way and get more time for down.
Do you think you've become more introspective?
I think I've become more. I think I've recognized my own need for downtime in a way that I didn't realize before. I didn't recognize before. Yeah, does that make sense?
That's really interesting because I think so often, and I think I'm guilty of this, that I constantly have the next thing on my agenda, right? The next thing, the next activity, the next project. And there's never time to just sit down and really evaluate, right? It's almost like you're always looking ahead. And that's not necessarily, it's good to look ahead, but you're never like, it's never like the debriefing, right? Afterwards, you're never having time to settle and say, well, what was that like? What, if I could do that again, what would I have done differently? You're almost just so prefixed on what's in front of you that you never have time to look back.
Right. Do you guys view yourselves as, if you were describing yourself, would you describe yourselves as more introverted or extroverted? Alex, I know you a lot better than I know Ron. Ron, you and I just, met a couple times.
Sure.
So I would guess, Alex, that you are extroverted, just from what I know about you.
The short answer to your question, then I'll let Ron go, is I am extroverted, but I think I'm less extroverted than the average person thinks I am. And the reason I say that is when I socialize with, I have a great time, but when I'm done, I'm exhausted. I'm depleted. I need a recovery period.
Hmm.
And I remember someone once explaining that to me. They said, well, and this was their opinion. They said an extrovert is someone who actually feeds off of others. They actually get more energy when they're socializing with others versus an introvert is someone who there's a depletion. They get exhausted from socializing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I love socializing, but as my wife will attest, and when we first moved in together, she thought, I'd come home and she thought, like, is everything okay? Like, did something bad happen? It's like, no, like I'm spent. I'm exhausted. I need recovery time.
Yeah.
So I think I'm an extrovert, but long-winded way of saying I don't think in the way that most people view me. I think people always think I'm on, and that's not true.
And I guess for me, it's kind of weird because I mentioned before we got started, there's another brother that we have, and it's kind of weird. I feel like between Alex and that brother, I'm kind of the weird Goldilocks zone where Alex is definitely...
That's not biased.
I mean...
Goldilocks implies the best.
I mean...
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
It fits. Right. So, I mean, when it comes to so Alex admittedly is not the most technical of us, right? You'll give me that, right?
Yes.
The other brother is super technical. I'm not nearly as technical as he is, but I'm not as, not technical as Alex. Which Alex is, he's not bad, but I'm a little more technical. But I think when it comes to social skills, Alex is clearly the salesperson in the family. He's able to really go out, he socialize, and I think he definitely has much more of the social abilities and graces that I don't have. But that being the case, I think our other brother is much more limited in that. So I'm kind of like the happy medium where I would say I'm kind of like Alex where I'm able to be extroverted if the situation calls for it, but I definitely come home and I need to be probably even more introverted than Alex is, and that's totally fine. I'm kind of weird where sometimes I might just be a bit of a hermit, and it's not that anything's wrong. It's just everybody kind of needs their own place to kind of center.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Okay. So all three of us are married.
Right.
Do you feel like your spouses match you in terms of your levels of introversion/extroversion? Yeah.
Hannah's more introverted than I am, but what she's very good at, she's much better at reading people than I am. And I think she can do a pretty good job of, kindly, under the table, hey, Alex, wrap it up. She can read a room better than I can. And I think she helps balance me out quite a bit.
I think for my wife, she's even more introverted than I am. But I think she kind of also helps balance me out because I think sometimes there is certain tendencies where, yes, I can definitely see myself like, I don't know, the guys all say, hey, let's all go to Vegas. And I'd be like, sure, let's go. And my wife might be like, probably not a good idea. You've got work tomorrow. So she does a good job, I think, of balancing me out on that. But she recognizes that. Like, she's kind of, she's even kind of indicated to me that before where she's like, especially I think it comes to like parties, for instance, where it's like, okay, there's a polite way to be like, okay, I think we've been here long enough and I think we've had a good time. It's okay to go. And she's really good about that. So, because I think she definitely gets much more drained than I do. So I think it kind of works out really well. What about you, Andy?
I think Debbie is, it's interesting. Debbie is, she's possibly slightly more introverted than me, but she's also someone who is incredibly comfortable in her own skin. So, when I'm in a social setting, to a certain extent, I feel like there's a performance. You're getting the Andy show. You guys are getting the Andy show, and you guys are just blown away by it right now. I can tell. But
we're gonna have to go to break soon. That is how blown away I am.
But Debbie is just very comfortable being herself in a way that I'm so jealous of. And so
Well,
when we're in a group, she's just natural and easygoing, and people are drawn to that. People love being around someone who's comfortable in their own skin. So in a
I was
way,
going to say,
yeah.
I was just going to say,
Sure.
it's interesting because when you said Debbie is, maybe a little bit more introverted than you, I would have thought the other way, and it's because, not that you don't have this, but she has such incredible confidence.
Yes.
She speaks.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're getting at. But normally when I think of introverted people, I naturally think of maybe a little bit more timid. They're saying things, but they're kind of maybe pulling back a little bit as they're saying it. And that is,
Right.
she has such confidence in her life, and I think it's that's a contagious energy in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I feel I got very lucky in the whole marriage thing. I feel very fortunate about that.
Well, terrific. Well, listen, what we're going to do, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to dive into your medical background, your interests, and then we're going to kind of wrap up with some interesting dynamics. I know we've already talked quite a bit about your wife. She grew up Jewish. You grew up Christian. Very interested in the different dynamics, and you've already mentioned your children. I think that'll be a really interesting way to end the show. So we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we got a lot of ground to carry. Really excited. We're having a great time with Dr. Howard, and we'll be right back.
Hey, I know what you're thinking. Right now might be a good time to go and get a quick break, but here's the thing. I'm thinking that you could also use this as a good opportunity to like, subscribe, and drop a comment on this video. It would help us. It would also get the search algorithms to make sure that this video pops up for more people. So we'd really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with Dr. Andy Howard, and we're going to dive into some really interesting topics now. Andy, one of the first things I found out about you when I met you years ago was that you have so many roots tied to Wisconsin. So one of the things I wanted to do with you, we've done this on a previous episode, and I think it was a lot of fun. We go through speed rounds where I'm going to give you a bunch of things. Ron and I are going to rotate back and forth. We're going to give you like very topical Wisconsin ideas, concepts, or items. And I just want you to, in as few words as possible, ideally less than 5, just give us your initial thoughts. Right? It can be very short, and then we can elaborate about it more if we want. But really just kind of quickly, hey, pro, against, this is something you need in this context. So that's sort of the format. We're going to go through some Wisconsinite things, and would love just your initial thoughts. Does that sound good?
And I think part of the rules too were you have 5 words to respond to it. Okay. And then we can kind of go
5
into
words or
more.
less.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you ready? I'm going to start, then Ron will go with the second. I'll go with the third, and go back.
I'm ready.
Forth.
Okay.
Right. Cheese curds.
Squeaky but addictive artery blockers.
Wow. Might have been more than 5, but it's so true. The squeaky component is the most true part, isn't it?
Yeah.
They really are. That's the tell
amazing.
part. That's the telling part of a really good cheese curd.
Because Ron and I grew up in cheese country too, Western New York. A lot of dairy farmers there.
Oh, sure.
And you could always tell, cheese curds. And there's a reason that it's hard to get cheese curds in most parts of the country. It's because the cheese needs to be super, super fresh.
Yes.
Like, if oxygen gets to it, it starts to get dried out, and then
yeah. And it's temperature dependent too. If it's too cold, it won't squeak. Yeah, there's a whole
right.
thing.
I've learned that too, where it's like you have to set it out for a little bit just to let it get to room temperature, and then you get the squeak, and then you're good. All right, next one, the Wisconsin Dells.
Touristy but awesome. There's a lot of haters of the Wisconsin Dells. People, it is very cheesy. It's very touristy, but it is just so much fun.
And for those listening, it's a huge water park.
Yeah.
But it's like everyone in the Midwest knows about it. Although I've never been. I got to go.
Oh, yeah.
Fish fries.
A once Catholic tradition, now universal. Is that 5? That was pretty close to 5.
I think it was 6, but
I think it was
close,
5.
close.
But
Yeah.
we'll throw it out. So yeah,
Okay.
once Catholic tradition, now universal. I love it.
Right.
All right.
Do you like fish fries? Do you participate in fish fries?
Growing up, it was something my parents are not Catholic, but it's just such a Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a lot of Catholics. It's just such a Wisconsin thing. Friday night, you go out for a fish fry with friends, and I really always enjoyed it.
I love fish fries too.
Mhm.
It's just.
I think culturally, just so you know, Andy, I think Wisconsin is very similar to Western New York in that very high Catholic percentage, very blue collar, Rust Belt, and, probably drink more beer than they should.
Yeah.
A lot of dairy farmers. And we grew up with fish fries too. And it was totally agreed. Even if you weren't Catholic, it was sort of something like all the restaurants in town had fish fries.
Amazing fish fries, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right, next one. Cheeseheads.
Inescapable is the word. All right, so I have a little story about this one. This is more than
Okay.
5 words. But I had a friend who was from Washington State so I went to medical school in Milwaukee, loved Milwaukee. And so I had this friend from Washington State who was her jaw dropped open at how universal adoration of the Packers was, or is. She gave the story. She told me the story once about she turned on, the nightly news, whatever the local news at 5 or whatever it was, and the host and anchor of the show, everyone's wearing Packers gear, and then the first story they present is about one of the Green Bay Packers and some charity event they're involved in or whatever, and then the next story is about some mass murdering felon, and they cut to them being led away in police, in handcuffs. And the felon is wearing Packers gear. Like literally everyone is wearing Packers gear at all times.
Well, and it stopped me there if I'm wrong. And Alex, I know, or Andy, I know you know this, but one of the cool parts about the Packers history is it's owned by the people, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is
right.
really
I think the
unique.
only NFL team that's like that. Yeah.
Yeah, they got grandfathered in. That's illegal now.
Yeah.
Oh, is it really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Harley Davidson.
Loud but awesome. Okay, another little backstory. So again, going to medical school in Milwaukee, once a year in the summer, there would be a Harley Fest where, because Harley Davidson's based in Milwaukee, they would host, a big party. So people would come from around the country on their Harleys. And that week in Milwaukee, if you're walking through downtown, if you're sitting in an outdoor restaurant, you cannot hear the people across from you because all the Harley riders are cruising up and down. So it's a little obnoxious, but it's hard not to love Harley Davidson.
Yeah, for sure. And that was actually the interesting thing is my friend who lived out there, his father worked for Harley. So that's the reason why I got to go out to the Wisconsin Fair. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah. All right, next one. New Glarus beer or Spotted Cow?
Delicious. Just
One word.
One word.
That's all it needs.
It is. It is. And Andy, tell me if I'm mistaken. I've heard this from multiple people in Chicago that they made some sort of agreement that they will never distribute outside of the state of Wisconsin.
I think that's true.
Yeah, they made some agreement with the state of Wisconsin. So the only way to get it is you have to physically go to Wisconsin to get it. So I've created my own little network here in Chicago where when I have certain friends that are going to go up to Wisconsin, they say, hey, do you want me to pick you up a 6-pack, Alex?
That's good.
And that's a very known thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And they're great, beer stores right along the border because, they know Illinoisians are crossing that border trying to get their fix.
Yeah. Highly recommended. Oshkosh Air Show.
Never been, really want to.
I've been.
Have you? Was it kind of as awesome as I'm imagining?
Years ago, I was like 10 years old with my dad, because my dad is, he had a lifelong goal of being a pilot, and it's a long story. He'll talk about it when he's on our show in a later episode. So we all went and seeing the Blue Angels, and they say the one weekend a year that the Oshkosh Air Show happens, that airport in Oshkosh becomes the busiest airport in the world in terms of number of landings and takeoffs in the world. More than Atlanta, more than O'Hare, more than anywhere.
Wow.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
believe it.
Next one. The mysterious beast known as the Hodag. Did I pronounce it wrong?
No, I think you pronounced it right. I'm trying to come up with a clever quip. Truth suppressed by the CIA.
Wow.
Now, Andy, is it fair to say the Hodag is like the Bigfoot of the Midwest? Is that right?
It's located in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, which is sort of central but very northern Wisconsin, central east-west, very north. So if you were from southern Wisconsin, you'd hear about the Hodag, but I always had the impression if you were from close to Rhinelander, that was something people talked about more.
And finally, the Badgers.
Next year for sure.
Here's hoping.
That's right.
Yeah, hopefully your buddy will be buying you some beer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So
I love
speaking, you made it through the speed round, and congratulations. I'm starting to think, Alex, this might be something we need to turn into an ongoing tradition with our guests. So,
yeah.
Because it's fun, right? And it's a good way to
really
kind of
fun.
just get to know your geography, like, Wisconsin. I need to
Right,
go to the Hodag, right? So speaking of the Badgers, that's where you went to medical school, right? And what did you think of that?
I went to undergrad at University of Wisconsin-Madison. My dad actually worked for the university. So I grew up in Madison. So when I moved into the dorms freshman year, I literally moved like 7 miles.
Okay.
But I went to undergrad there, and then I went to medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin, which it used to be part of Marquette University and then split off. So that's why it's
I see. Okay. And that's where you mentioned earlier in Milwaukee.
Yeah. And I loved medical school. I made terrific friends. I really enjoyed, the whole educational experience. I can't say enough about what a great time I had in medical school. Actually, my medical school reunion is happening this coming weekend, so I'm really looking forward to seeing a bunch of old pals.
Congratulations.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So, I mean, I always think it's interesting when you talk to people who went to medical school, went to residency. Like, what's the story with their specialty, right? And you studied oncology. What was so interesting about cancer to you?
Yeah, so so the way medical school is structured, it's 4 years long. You get one summer. The summer between your first and second year, you get that summer off, and you can do whatever you want. So my sister was actually in the Peace Corps in West Africa. So I went and basically spent that summer with her in West Africa and loved it. When I came back, one of my friends had spent the summer doing a research project in radiation oncology, which became my specialty. And he kind of said, to all of us, all the guys, a group of friends, like, we all got to go into radiation oncology. It's the best field. It's awesome.
Really?
And then in the end, actually, I was the only one who did it. But okay. There's 3, as a rough rule of thumb, there's 3 basic ways to treat cancer. You can cut the tumor out, which a surgeon does. You can give chemotherapy or other drugs, which a medical oncologist does, or you can zap it with radiation, which is what I do. And depending on the cancer and the stage and the exact situation, it's not unusual actually that 2 of the 3 or that all 3 end up being used in conjunction to fight the cancer.
So you were particularly interested in the zapping component. I'm just
In
using
the zapping.
the motion that you gave, the little motion. It is a zap of radiation.
It is a zap of radiation, right? Yeah. So the way it works is, so we're all surrounded by radiation all the time. Just living on Earth, and I know, right? And who knew? So our normal cells, are pretty good at handling it. So as you imagine the cell going through its little cell cycle, it has various checkpoints where it can stop and basically has molecular machinery that can reevaluate its own DNA and look for damage to that DNA from radiation. Cancer cells lose a lot, if not all, of those checkpoints. So if you have a bunch of cells, some cancer, some non-cancerous, you shine radiation at them, the cancer cells are going to be much more affected by the radiation than the non-cancer cells.
So wait a
it's sort
second.
of a selective killer.
I think I remember part of this. This is coming back to me. You got prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase.
Oh, look at
which
you.
Is part of the,
yeah.
Right? So it's related to the cellular regeneration, right? Where during that process, it's maybe the normal phases wouldn't be going correct. Am I right there? Or am I way off?
No, I think you're right. Honestly, you're getting down to finer detail that really I have even gotten into with my reading about this. I know when they talk about how the cancer cells die, they call it a reproductive death because it's the next time that the cancer cell tries to divide. That's when everything goes kaput.
Gotcha.
So, Andy, let me ask you a question here. This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also serious, which is when I think about radiation, I think about how that gives people cancer. Can you, I always think about, you go to Chernobyl, right? Your chances of getting cancer are much higher, right? So
right.
Why is radiation the thing that can actually give people cancer a cancer killer?
Right. No, you're asking a terrific question. So, although our normal cells are pretty good at handling cancer, they're not perfect. So you're exactly right that normal cells can sustain DNA damage. And, the vast majority of the time, the DNA damage from radiation in a normal cell either does nothing or close to nothing, or just basically leads that cell to apoptosis, to basically committing suicide. But, in very rare cases, but not zero times, the radiation can turn that cell into a malignant cell. And it turns out that the risk of that is pretty darn low. And so there's a few different things we think about with that. One is that the risk is quite low. So generally, we often think it's an order of 1 in thousands of patients who are exposed to radiation may end up getting a cancer secondary to having received the radiation. So the risk is low. There's also...
So I just want to make sure, and I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying, science has shown that, yes, in getting cancer treatment through radiation, there is a possibility that you could get cancer from the actual treatment, but the odds are so low that it's worth the risk when you're talking about being able to successfully kill the cancer cells that you already have.
Right. Yes. And, nobody chooses to get it's not something anyone would ever choose to do if you really had great other options in front of you. You're facing a serious situation. So it's at a point, in your life when you're willing to take risks to fight the cancer that you currently have.
I would think most people would be perfectly fine risking cancer in the future. Low chance, right? But chance of to be able to take care of the problem I have today. Exactly.
Well, and that's another thing is that there's a significant delay from radiation exposure to when a person may be diagnosed with a cancer from that radiation exposure. So if I'm treating a patient who's 78 years old with a cancer now, we often say, as a rough rule of thumb, it's going to be on the order of at least 10 years before they would even start to be at risk of getting a radiation-induced malignancy. So by that time, they're 88. They may have other concerns.
They have bigger problems at that point.
Yeah.
Well, and isn't it? And part of it too is that with applying radiation therapy, there are things that we know about, like, for instance, the way that the particles travel and the level of energy that you're kind of dispensing. So, for instance, if you are applying radiation therapy to a certain part of the body, it's a fairly localized type of procedure, right? It's not necessarily you're just blasting it with radiation hoping it turns out, right?
Right. Yeah. And we spend a whole lot of time and frankly a whole lot of money figuring out ways to very precisely target the radiation right where we want it to go, with minimal exposure of with minimal other tissues exposed to radiation.
Do you, Andy, do you mind explaining at a really high level, dumb it down for me, like I'm a 5-year-old. How do you convey the difference between healthy cells and cancer cells? I mean, how do they act differently, and what makes cancer cells so horrible to the human body?
No, that's a terrific question, and it turns out to be a very complicated one. So cancer cells, they're generally reproducing out of control. There are two main things I guess I think about. There are cancer cells that are reproducing out of control, and
is that what's creating these tumors that sometimes you can physically see on people?
Exactly.
Because it's just so much growth that is uncontrollable.
Exactly. And so
it's damaging healthy cells in doing that, right?
Right. And so there's sort of the other part is that cancer cells have the ability to break off, into your bloodstream, travel elsewhere, settle out somewhere else, and start a new tumor there. So those are sort of the two really dangerous things about it. If you had a lump of cancer, a lump of cells that was reproducing out of control, but it just stayed where it was, I mean, that's obviously annoying and potentially problematic, but generally you could scoop it out, or you could have a surgeon could cut it out and you're fine. But the fact that they can also spread elsewhere is what makes them so insanely dangerous.
So that movement from one part to another, that's when it metastasizes, right? That's what that term means. Because it's interesting, when I think about cancers, they always say there are certain cancers that are better to have than others, right? That sounds bad to say, but better than others. And I've always heard, well, it's because they're slow moving. And is that normally what people mean when they say, oh, it's a slow moving cancer, meaning it won't metastasize, it'll stay regional for a long period of time?
That often is what people mean when they say that, yes. And there's also, there are cancers. So, for example, a classic example is prostate cancer. Prostate cancer tends to be, it can grow, it can spread elsewhere, it can cause death of the patient, but it tends to do it slowly. Cancers of the throat, on the other hand, tend to be very fast-moving cancers. When you treat a patient with prostate cancer, you kind of have more time to get everything lined up and get the cancer treatment going. Cancer of the throat, it's kind of boom, boom, boom. You got to sort of jump on it and get it going, everything going really quickly.
So, weird question for you. I know that there are cancers that are definitely very, they definitely spread much quicker. The cells grow out of control. In an average person, are there cancerous cells on a daily basis that maybe don't necessarily get caught that our immune system is able to take care of?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So this is a little outside my specialty, but I've read a little bit about this. And yeah, if there was some, urine test that we could all take right now, all of us would be shown to have cancer all the time. But the vast majority of the time, our immune system is actually able to take care of those cancers for us.
Very cool.
And so, in those instances, are the healthy cells able to control and maybe suppress these cancer cells from going out of control? I mean, is that sort of the thought?
It's thought, you can sort of imagine that there are three paths that a cancer might take when it's inside a person's body. One is sort of the classic where it grows and potentially spreads out of control unless the patient gets appropriate treatment to stop that and cure it, and obviously hoping everything's caught early enough for that to even be possible. Another path is the cancer could arise, form a tumor, perhaps even a tumor of some size, but then the immune system recognizes it and is able to fight it down, so the immune system makes it go away forever. And then the third path is sort of in the middle, where a cancerous tumor could arise, but then it just hangs out. Maybe a sort of balance is struck between the immune system and the cancer, and the patient could potentially live, years, decades, their entire life with that there, and it never actually causes them problems.
Wow.
That's really interesting. I think my initial thought, Andy, and I obviously have no medical background, but when I think about dealing with cancer, you mentioned it earlier, there's sort of the let's scalp it out, right, through surgery. Mm-hmm. There's the chemo, and then there's what you do, with the radiation. Mm-hmm. I guess my question is, are there alternatives where you say, maybe there's research on this being done, I don't know, but is there a way to say, hey, whatever, in the successful cases where the immune system is able to independently fight back the cancer, can we, from a medical standpoint, help enable that? Help enable the own immune system to fight off the cancer like we've seen in those instances that you mentioned in option 2?
Absolutely. And that is a tremendously exciting new area of research in terms of fighting cancer. So I don't know if you guys have heard the term immunotherapy, but it is a tremendously exciting new modality we have for fighting cancer. And so what immunotherapy is, it's these new drugs, these new medicines that we found that basically help the immune system recognize that the cancer is there and fight the cancer itself. You can sometimes think of it, imagine there's a company, inside a big office building, and everyone has little ID badges. And so they're all walking around, and everyone's, there's security guards walking around, but as long as you've got your ID badge, security guard's fine with you. But then some evil, bad guys get inside the building, but they've managed to come up with fake ID badges that are recognized, that the security guys think are real. So they're able to get inside the building and cause all sorts of problems, cause all sorts of havoc because they have these fake ID badges. So this is a little outside, again, my exact field of specialty, but my understanding is what immune therapy often can do is almost as if it takes away those fake ID badges. So now the security guard recognizes, like, oh, wait, that's a bad guy, is able to take care of it.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's one of those words you've heard, and I just never knew what it was. Go ahead.
Oh, sure.
So I've got a tough question for you. We talked about this before we got started. So I hear a lot about carcinogens. And I mean, my goodness, I think if I go outside, I'll get carcinogens. I've heard that. If I drink water, I might get some of those things, right? And carcinogens cause cancer. I mean, alcohol, I heard it, even that has carcinogens in it. But then I also have heard about these wonderful things called antioxidants. And I go drink a bunch of tea and it's like, oh, I'm all good. Could you kind of give me like the high level, like, do I need to worry about carcinogens? Is it like the amount of exposure? Like, okay, if I go around and roll around in, I don't know, pile of, depleted uranium, like that might be a problem, or is it more just like go drink 2 cups of tea, maybe some vodka might help you? I don't know.
What are your
Okay.
thoughts on that?
All right, so I have a multi-layered response to that.
Okay,
so you're absolutely right. Carcinogens are something that, as a general rule, you should probably avoid, or at least not expose yourself to them too much. All of biology, arguably all of life, is about adjusting your odds, adjusting your risk ratio. So imagine you're going to cross a busy street. If all you do is start walking across the busy street without, looking both ways, your odds of being hit by a car are obviously pretty darn high.
Right.
Now imagine instead of doing that, first you just look to your left before you cross the busy street. Okay, now you've improved your odds a little bit, but your odds maybe are not quite as low as you'd like.
Especially if we're in Europe, right?
Especially if you're in Europe, right? If you look to your left and look to your right, you've improved your odds even more. If you cross at a crosswalk, you've improved your odds even more. So there's a lot of things you can do to improve your odds or to worsen your odds of making it across those busy streets. So when you have a delicious carcinogen like this lager, you may be shifting your odds a tiny bit, but there's nothing. I don't know. Then you get into this whole philosophical.
Is life worth?
Yeah.
Is life worth living without some carcinogens?
Have you guys heard of this? There's a really fascinating concept called a micromort. Alex, maybe you and I talked about this last time we were hanging out.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, a micromort it's a way to conceptualize risk. So a micromort is a unit of measurement that it's a 1 in a million chance of dying. So, for example, I read a little thing about this recently, and if my memory is correct, anytime you go skydiving with a parachute, it's 7 micromorts.
Okay.
So you've 7 in a million chance of that. A woman giving birth vaginally is about 125 micromorts for the woman herself, for the mom.
Okay.
If she gives birth by cesarean, it's about 175 micromorts.
I see. So evaluating all these activities on a level of risk.
Right. So it's a way to quantify. But then there's another one. I'm blanking on the term for it.
Having a beer, 50 micro. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
One.
But then there's another one that's like a micro life, and that is it's something that statistically improves your life expectancy by half an hour. So I'm kind of making up these numbers because I don't remember exactly what it is. Eating a plate of vegetables is about 7 micro lives.
Going for a run?
Going for a
Maybe
run
4?
is a certain number of... I remember owning a dog. Each day you own a dog, or a cat actually, is about 1 micro life. Is that it improves your life expectancy by
Unless
half an
you're
hour.
highly allergic to those animals.
Unless you're
They kill
highly
you.
allergic to
Then
those
it's like -1 per day. You gotta balance
and there are
out.
some things that are actually both. Like, if I recall correctly, having sex is both has a certain number of micromorts associated with it and a certain number of micro lives associated with it.
So it probably
which
depends
is-
on your age and your health, right? Like that probably
Right.
factors in there. Ah.
Right. So it's
And if that's
you
the
have a
cause of
certain-
death, I'm okay.
There are
with
worse.
that. So,
There are worse cases, right?
right.
So yeah, so if you do it, you have a certain chance in a million of dying. But if you survive that, then you've improved your life expectancy by so many half hours.
So much serotonin's released. You feel
Right.
better. I love it.
Huh. So I have to ask you this, and then we're going to change topics. But I think
Okay.
you have done such a good job, in my opinion, and I mean this, of helping convey Cancer 101 to a non-technical, non-medical background person. I'd love to know, is there a book that maybe that is available that maybe someone I know on this call has written about the topic?
That is an excellent setup. Yes. So a few years ago, so what actually happened is I was seeing patients in the clinic, and there was so much my patients didn't know when they walked in the door. Just basics about what's the difference between chemotherapy and radiation. It felt like basic to me. Obviously, totally understand why a normal person wouldn't be, something would immediately leap to mind for them. But I felt like, oh, there's so much I wish they knew when they walked in the door, because then we could have a higher level discussion, right off the bat. So I started ranting to my long-suffering wife about these topics, and I eventually wrote a very slim little book that basically was designed to be. I sort of thought of it as like what your oncologist, what your cancer doctors kind of wish you knew when you walked in the door. So it's called "So You've Got Cancer: The Super Patient's Guide to Diagnosis, Treatment, and Beyond." It's available on Amazon. It's pretty inexpensive. I wrote it sort of before immunotherapy had really taken off. I wish I was just talking to my dad today. I should come up with a new edition that includes more about immunotherapy, because it's a fascinating. Yeah, it really is a game changer for us.
And for all of our listeners too, we will post a link in the description so you can check that out for yourself.
Oh yeah, and it's self-published on Amazon. It's not but it's a slim little book, and I like to think it's pretty reasonable. It's got some illustrations and stuff.
Very cool. Well, listen, we are running out of time, but there's some topics I really want to hit for selfish reasons. One of the things I really want to talk about is you grew up in a Christian household, married a Jewish woman. And that sounds very similar to my upbringing, because it is. I grew up Christian, married a Jewish woman. You have kids now, right? You have two. You've already talked about them earlier. How is that difference of religions, that upbringing, how has that affected your relationship? And how has Judaism, that religion, impacted your life?
Oh, great. So I knew very little actually about Judaism before I met Debbie. I mean, I had friends who were Jewish, but I didn't actually know much about the religion. And Debbie and I, in one of our very early conversations, we were talking about having kids, and Debbie mentioned it was really important to her that her kids be Jewish. And she, although I grew up, culturally Christian, we maybe attended church on Christmas Eve. It wasn't something that was...
Hey, don't forget those fish fries.
Then the fish fries, of course.
Those count for something.
Those count as 2 micro-lives.
Oh, that's right.
For sure.
Right. So, I was fine with the kids being Jewish. And then now we live in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago. And we're members of the synagogue where my wife grew up. It's KAM, Isaiah Israel. It's a wonderful community. It's right across the street from the Obama House in Chicago. And it's just a really warm and welcoming community. And it's not, what I love about it is the friends I've made there, and the community's emphasis on helping the poor, and sort of the values I feel like my kids are picking up from it. And I feel like, honestly, if we were members of some great, Episcopal church or whatever, they could have picked up similar values or whatever. But we're doing this in a Jewish setting. Okay, and one thing that's really struck me about Judaism that I didn't know about, somehow the little I knew about Christianity, really, from growing up, from those Christmas Eve services or whatever, there's a whole lot of guilt. There's a whole lot of guilt, and the whole emphasis on this notion that we humans
especially
are sinners.
In Catholicism.
Probably especially Catholicism. We are sinners. We are, so lucky that Jesus came and saved us all. And Judaism...
From eternal damnation.
From eternal damnation. Judaism definitely has its quirks and weirdnesses or whatever, but there's at least as I've learned about it from Debbie and from our current synagogue, there's so much less guilt, which is just a real breath of fresh air. I love that there's not.
And isn't it like you get one day a year and you get to restart, like Yom Kippur, right?
Right, yeah, Yom Kippur, you wipe the slate clean.
Right, which I like that idea.
Well, and I'm not Jewish. My wife is culturally Jewish, and I've learned through her a lot of those similar sentiments where I really like, there's a lot of very practical applications where, like, so Ron during that same time period, you're supposed to ask for forgiveness and apologize to certain people you've wronged. There's no communication with praying to God or asking forgiveness from God. It's asking your fellow man. And by the way, my favorite part of Judaism is that there's not this threat that you're going to burn in hell and shovel coal.
Yes.
That's what I grew up with. You either believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, or you're going to be shoveling coal for the rest of your life. And,
Right.
I found that to be pretty extreme. Belief.
Well, and I think what's tough with that too is that so much of what we're told is God's loving. So, okay, why is there's loving God, but then there's also vengeful, hateful God that is going to condemn you if you slight him in the wrong way or whatever.
Going to smite you.
And then the rest of your life, the rest of the eternity, you have to pay for that. It's a really kind of weird, which I feel like Judaism doesn't quite seem to have that same level of, so help me, you do this and you're going to pay for eternity.
Right. And, being totally fair, obviously Christianity is, a very big tent. And, I'm sure there's, churches that emphasize different things. And Judaism is an enormous tent with, various beliefs within it. So,
for sure. It is just very interesting. It almost seems like, and I'm sure someone who practices Judaism might disagree with me on this. That's fine. But it seems to me, with my knowledge, it is more of a philosophy than a religion. That's how my understanding of it is. It's more of a way to live as opposed to do these sets of things. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you already knew, I guess, getting back to my original question about the family dynamic. So you already knew before you even got married, before you had children, that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you weren't necessarily going to convert, but they were going to be raised in a Jewish household. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Right. So we're not 100% faithful in this, but we very often go to services on Friday evenings, and often on Fridays we'll light the candles and say the little prayers. And I love the family get-togethers for the high holidays and for Passover. So we do a lot of that.
Which for anyone who's listening, if you've never been to a Passover,
oh yeah,
call your neighborhood Jewish person, your neighborhood or whatever, and experience it. It is awesome. An amazing holiday that involves drinking 4 glasses of wine.
Oh, yeah.
It's my favorite holiday. It's better than Christmas, in my opinion. So, any religion that offers 4 glasses of wine during a dinner is part of the ritual.
Right.
Yeah,
you can't beat that. Well, and
maybe 4 glasses of Malort,
Well, that might turn off some people, but I mean, even my tax guy, and if he's listening, Howard, you're awesome. He actually did a Passover Seder and invited my family as well, and we had a great time with that. And
that is great.
To this day, it's awesome because I remember with my daughter, she's got some Jewish friends at school, and she's like, "Oh, I did Passover. I know what that's all about."
Yeah.
So it's just a good experience.
Oh yeah, yeah,
for sure. Hey, so last question of the evening, and this might have several follow-up questions, but this is the last topic. Andy, you and I, when I first asked you to be on this podcast, you and I were spitballing. We were in Hyde Park together. I believe we were walking to the Museum of Science and Industry, an incredible location if you've never been. And you'd mentioned wave theory.
Yes.
And I was like, wait, what? I said, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about this. Can you explain to the audience what this is?
All right. This is my very weird, it's one of those things where you have what you yourself perceive as like, oh, I've come across this amazing philosophical insight. This is going to change the world. And the more you share it with other people, the more you realize, like, no, it's just you. Like, you're the weird one. And so that's what I sort of realized about my little wave theory. Okay, so but the wave theory is, I was thinking about, I'm kind of interested in the history of science, and I was thinking about how physicists for several hundred years have been struggling with the question of what is light. And there are basically two schools of thought. There is a school of thought that said light is particles, streaming through the universe. And there's certainly, experimental evidence to support this, that it's individual particles, that we see that are bouncing off things that we see. There's another theory that it's not individual particles, that there is this ether that permeates the entire universe, and light. All what light is waves in the ether, or are waves in the ether. So these two beliefs were sort of considered in conflict, and then in the early 20th century, Einstein and some other colleagues of his sort of showed there's actually not really a conflict there. Both theories are true. It's both a wave and a particle. And so, you're hearing about this from someone who knows just enough to be dangerous. But my understanding is that mathematicians have gotten interested in this whole concept of when is something a particle, when is something a wave. And if you do the math, it turns out that it's not just light that sort of has this dual nature. Things that we normally consider matter also have a dual nature. So an electron can be described as both a wave and as a particle. A proton also. In fact, larger things. So mathematicians and scientists have shown that even things up to the size of small bacteria can be described as both waves and particles. And apparently, it's actually possible that things larger than that are also waves and particles, possibly even us. But the math gets messy, so it's harder to really show that. So I got interested in this whole, like, what is a wave, what is a particle? And I think I was particularly interested in it because, this is my day job. I fight cancer with radiation, which has this weird duality. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? And sort of really, what's it doing?
What's the answer?
All right. So then I was listening to NPR, to National Public Radio, and they had some science guy on. And the science guy was talking about how, all of us, as we ingest atoms, as we eat, as we drink, as we inhale, we're taking in material that our body then uses to replace individual cells in our skin or our bones, whatever. And then we poop and pee and our skin cells fall off and everything. So there's this constant flow of atoms into us, replacing structures, replacing tissues, and then the old atoms sort of fall out of us. And what he said that really caught my attention on this, he said that, different tissues have sort of different turnover. So bones are relatively solid. Water, we're 70% water. Water flows through us pretty quickly. You drink a glass of water, water comes out of you. That's pretty fast turnover. Skin cells are obviously turnover pretty quickly. But from the beginning of a year to the end of the year, a whopping 98% of your atoms are completely turned over, which is shocking to think
Only
about.
2%. Wait, so you're saying, just to be clear, January 1st to January 1st, or
Right.
later, only 2% of what makes Alex Stud is from the previous year is physically still there.
Right. So when Hannah looks at you, in despair and says, "You're not the man I married," you have to say, "Yeah, you're
It's
right.
true.
I'm not.
It's true.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not that guy.
I'm not
anymore."
even half the man I used to be.
Right.
That's true by June.
Right. And apparently the atoms that stick around the longest, you think they're up in the brain of, where how our sense of personality is. No, brain's turned over just like all the rest of us. The atoms that stick around the longest are in the enamel of our teeth. which is sort of humbling to think about. So then I got you guys are very patient listening to this whole spiel.
No, because
no,
you know what?
This is fascinating.
I was reading about wave and particle theory with Hawking's book, The Universe in a Nutshell, and there is a basic problem where it's like with wave theory versus particle theory, the ones like, the more precise you try to get with measurement, the more difficult it is to actually assess what's actually there, and vice versa.
Right.
So, yeah, you get into some really interesting kind of dichotomies between the two. But
right,
yeah,
and then this also got me thinking about waves like on a body of water, waves on an ocean, waves on a lake. Mm-hmm. So I remember being a little kid, and you'd see waves coming across a lake at you, and I would think, okay, what I'm seeing here is water being transported, water starting on the other side of the lake, and it's coming towards me. So water is being transported, and then as you learn about what waves on water actually are, the water actually isn't coming towards you at all. A wave moves across.
So visually, I'm going to try this. So instead of being like, oh, the wave's coming this way, right?
Yeah.
It's actually more like water goes up, 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 and it's more like an electron transfer where the electron itself.
That's a great description.
Yeah, it doesn't really move anywhere.
Yeah.
It's just very small, limited space.
Right. So the energy is moving. The energy is coming across the lake. But the water itself isn't. So the water sort of gets swept up into the wave. It does actually a little circular movement, and then it basically ends up right where it started, and the wave moves on. So I was thinking about that. If you're at a lake with some friends, you see a wave out there, you might say to your friends like, "Hey, check out that wave," and you point to it. But by the time your friends look at it, it's made of entirely different water than when you first pointed at it. Which is sort of like us, right? I mean, if we're taking in atoms and releasing atoms, who are we from one moment to another? All right, and then here's the last aspect of the wave theory. And again, I appreciate you guys' patience listening to this weirdness. So
you're making me get very existential. That's
no. This is we should have had something stronger than alcohol to really have this conversation. But so a wave is energy. A wave is it's not water moving. It's energy moving. It's energy going across the lake. So what are we? Are we energy? And we're not really. What we are is information. What causes us to absorb the atoms we do and to release the atoms we do is the information that's encoded in our DNA. Our cells know how to build hands, build fingers, to do all the things that make up our body because of the information that's encoded in the DNA that makes up us. And we make decisions about our daily lives. We make decisions about what beer to have. We make decisions about who to befriend, also based on information, not necessarily information encoded in our DNA, although a little bit that, but information that we've learned about the world from our experiences.
Well, now you're getting into free will.
Right. Oh, that's a whole thing.
Is the data that is assessed from our past actions causing us to make our current and future actions?
Right. I mean, that's a whole topic. But I was thinking, as much as a wave on the ocean is energy, we are information. We're information encoded from our DNA. We're information that we've learned from our experiences. And of course, the information that we've learned from our experiences is constantly changing. Like now, you guys are going to go forward and your lives are going to be completely different because you've had this amazing conversation with me from this information. And also, scientists are now finding that even the information encoded in our DNA, which we think is stable from, when we're first conceived to when we die, even that actually has been shown to be, to some degree, in flux. So if our physical bodies are constantly changing and the information that makes up us is constantly changing, what are
Who are we?
Really? Who are we? And then this ties in with Buddhism has this whole concept of anatta, non-self. The Buddha was a big believer in this whole idea that we are like the wave in the ocean that you point to and say, hey, buddies, check out that wave. But then it's, 30 seconds later, it's made of entirely different water. There's nothing stable about us. So that's sort of interesting if you read a little bit about Buddhist philosophy.
Well, so I don't know much about Buddhist philosophy, but I'll say this. What you made me think about was 98% of our physical body changes year to year. You talk about how our DNA changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I start wondering is what sticks with you the longest? And what sticks with us the longest, my immediate thought is my memories, my lessons, things I've learned from my parents. And, well, what did my parents learn? They learned from their parents.
Right.
So we think about what we learned from we think about DNA and my ancestral physical components that have come down, hundreds of generations and have created who I am today and the way I think today. But is it more so the DNA? I guess we're getting into a nurture versus nature conversation, right? The conversations that have percolated down from generation to generation, from 100 generations up, have resulted in subconsciously some of the ways I think, right?
Right.
Well, and there's that, but then correct me if I'm wrong on this, but one of the things that has been interesting that I think you were hinting at is that recent research has actually shown that when you are infected by several viri, for instance, there is an exchange of genetic material. So your DNA will actually adjust and modify whenever you get sick as well. So you're no longer the same exact being you were prior to your exposure. So
does that mean that the statement that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger is actually true?
I don't know about that one. That is a good question, though.
It may be a stretch.
It definitely changes you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's that whole concept, there's that whole idea that matter and energy can be, one can go into the other, one could be transformed into the other by, that E equals MC squared. But really, whatever you call matter/energy, it can't be destroyed. Basically, whatever matter energy was present at the Big Bang is still with us and will always be with. I think there's actually a little controversy about that around black holes. I'm not totally sure about that.
Well, Andy,
but apparently,
I know it's totally unrelated, but I've been saying that for years. I've been saying, well, if matter's never created or destroyed, then what makes up Andy Howard and what makes up Ron Studd and what makes up Alex Studd is material that is 10 billion years old.
Right.
I should have been able to drink before I was 21 years old out of my mother's womb because the material that makes up Alex Studd is 10 billion years old.
Oh, and what I'm about to say even strengthens that argument even more is that apparently information theorists think the same thing could be said of information. Information cannot be created or destroyed.
Oh, no, I've never heard that one before.
I've heard that.
And so
you're saying there's no original idea?
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating, potentially.
Well, I think the way I've heard it is that, like, for instance, so let's say New York Times puts out a crossword puzzle today, right?
Uh-huh.
I want to say that they've done research that basically indicates that a day or two after, there is a higher success rate with completing that crossword puzzle. And it's kind of assumed more or less, outside of removing all of the factors that you would normally think of, there is some kind of indication that there is a cultural, larger knowledge set that is more or less shared across the community.
Wow.
Which is kind of weird.
I hadn't heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're saying, I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying I have people in my life, directly or indirectly, that have solved this puzzle. It's now being used in their vernacular because they just solved the puzzle. And so all of a sudden, I am able to hear it. I'm able to solve.
Somehow
am I
you're
going
able
in the
to
right direction?
Yeah, somehow you're able to solve it, and it's more or less a theory that once it's kind of become in the collective knowledge
Once
base,
it's in the ether,
there is some kind of ability to kind of pull it down faster.
I mean,
wow.
I'll have to find the research on it.
This conversation took a strange detour
It's
about
gone very
15 minutes
weird,
ago,
yeah.
and I love it.
I mean, it actually kind of goes back to almost to what we were talking about Judaism. When if God's first words are "Let there be light," are we all? If all information has always been there, are we all manifestations of the initial whisperings of God? Who knows? Maybe
It's all
really
wave theory, man. It's all waves.
Yeah, it's all waves.
I think we have to end the episode with that one. I don't know.
I
Andy,
mean,
you
just
said. I don't know where to go from there.
I'm 100% sure that there are actual real information theorists and physicists who are listening to this right now who are tearing their hair out, being like, jaws dropped open at how wrong everything I've just said is. But it's fun to talk about.
They can email us if they have problems.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're really that much of an expert on the topic, we'd love to have you on the show.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, Andy, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for being on the show. And, we'll make sure to post information about your book. And, again, really appreciate you taking your time for us at Between Two Studs.
No, thank you guys. Honestly, I love this conversation. And, I love your guys' podcast. Thank you so much for having me.